Thanks, Darren. And good afternoon, everybody. Let me just pop a PowerPoint up here. And see if that works. Hang on. Right, hopefully everybody can see that. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This is kind of a new experience. I haven't done a webinar to a 100-ish or 50 to 100 people before, so this will be interesting. And yeah, just by introduction, for whatever it's worth, these are kind of my thoughts about what's going on, kind of near term, short term, and medium term. All kind of comes out of here after a lot of reading and thinking and pondering and a few glasses of wine. And I'm really looking forward to some conversation at the end of this. I've been doing these presentations, as Darren said, for the Icehouse for over a decade now, and the most stuff I've ever learned has actually come from the people that the Icehouse brought in to talk to me. So I'm kind of like an information vampire, so I look forward to learning from all of you. So just a couple of caveats up front, I guess. The world has obviously changed massively, to state the incredibly obvious. And I think what I'm looking at is kind of the beginning of the beginning. And I think it's very, very difficult to extrapolate out over a long period, of what we've already seen so far. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is your mileage may vary, and I will be painting some very, very broad brushstrokes. So there'll be parts of this where you'll go, that's not us. I have no idea what this guy is talking about, or this guy has no idea what he's talking about. So I've tried to kind of look very broadly at things due to the breadth of the audience. So please forgive me if any of this looks completely irrelevant or insane. Rightio, so let's go through the agenda. I've been made an agenda. So what I'm going to talk about is today. We're at literally today. And then I'll talk a bit about the impacts that I can see the pandemic having on businesses in the near term. I kind of think of myself sometimes as a near futurist. I'm not very good, decades out, but I've got a bit of a knack for maybe looking a year out. And lastly, some thoughts about actions that you might want to think about for your businesses. I guess those might be kind of the challenges that were mentioned earlier. So let's talk about today. So let me just tell you, I'll begin with a little story. On February the 27th of this year, I was in Auckland to run a 2-day strategic planning workshop for a medium-sized business in East Auckland. They're about 50 to 60 people, very smart business, very well led, and doing extremely well in their niche, starting to move into Australia, making some really good inroads there. And what we were doing was basically pulling their last year's strategic plan apart and reassembling it for the next 12 months. During the course of that conversation, it was on February 27th, 28th, during the course of that session, we talked a little bit about COVID-19. I'd been watching it quite closely for a couple of months due to the immunocompromised status that my partner has. And there was one other person on the leadership team of that company who was also looking at it quite closely. Everybody else was relatively blasé about it. And so we, the two of us were kind of painting this as potentially a threat to business. And back on February 27th, the others in the leadership team of a very, very smart, successful business I would describe them as being less than convinced. Fast forward to March the 23rd, and all of a sudden, we're in lockdown alert level 3, and fast forward again through to March 25th, and here we are today in level 4. And the thing that I think is interesting about that is that's a total of 77 days. Now, that's the most profound thing I have ever seen happen in business, or I think it will prove to be, but I think it already is proving to be. And it took 77 days from when I first flagged it to anybody in business. And I think it's really important to understand both that this is without a doubt a very long-term thing, and we'll talk a bit about that. I'll talk a bit about that. But the impact short-term is absolutely ginormous. If you go back and look at other events such as the Great Depression kicking off, etc., those things played out actually over quite long periods of time. Yes, there were stock market crashes and things like that. But we are at the beginning of the beginning, and I think it's important to remember that. And it's important to remember that because this will have a profound effect on individuals and also businesses. So the first thing I want to talk about is the effect it will have on people. This is Maslow's hierarchy, and I would imagine just about everybody on this call has seen Maslow's hierarchy in some shape or form before. And the basis of it is, for those that haven't, this is kind of what we wish to ascend into as humans. We eventually want to become self-actualized, whatever the heck that means. But you can't get to those points without the things underneath being in place. So, you can't feel like you belong and that you're societally connected without feeling safe. And you can't feel safe without food and shelter and warmth and, those types of things. What's definitely happened to, the vast majority of humans on the planet over the last, let's say, 77 days, is that they've gone from somewhere near the middle or top of that hierarchy, in a lot of cases, right down to the bottom. And that will fundamentally change the way people think and act. They will move from being logically driven or able to think logically about things and act logically to a far more limbic or emotionally driven state. And so all of you will be feeling this in some way, and all of you will be seeing this in some way in both your family members, in your staff members, and in your customers and others around you. There is a business version of Maslow's hierarchy that I stumbled across a little while back, which I quite like, actually. I really like simple models. Basically, if you think about how you build a business, the reason I like it is it's actually kind of makes sense. The first thing you're doing when you're building your business up is you're looking for sales, you're looking for customers, you want to drive cash flow. The next bit after that would be, it'd be nice to be able to, crank a bit of a profit out of that. And then, get to a point where you're a far more efficient business to drive more profit and make things easier. And the last two, the impact and legacy thing, are more about what the business delivers to society. So the impact that a business might have on society and the legacy they might leave behind. For most New Zealand small and medium businesses, they operate somewhere in those first three. When they're starting out, they're down the bottom in the green, and hopefully over a bit of time, they get right into that yellow. And some of them, a small percentage make it a little bit higher than that. Most, if not all, small and medium businesses in New Zealand have done a massive drops to the bottom of that scale, right? And so whereupon, 77 days ago, you might have been thinking about how do you make your business more efficient. Right now, a lot of people are just trying to figure out how to bring cash in the front door. And that will change behavior fundamentally as well. Moving from and I'm talking to you as leaders and managers of businesses, you will well know that the mindset change of making your organization more efficient and leading from the front is very different than the mindset required to get out there and drum up sales and drum up cash. And that will be, you're already going through the first Maslow's hierarchy thing, and now as business people, you're going through the second piece. And this is, I think the best word to use for this is trauma. I think this is a very traumatic thing for people to go through. The important thing to remember with this is the first wave. It's like dropping a pebble into the pond. You can work out pretty easily what that first set of waves looks like. But once they start bouncing off objects and things start to get a bit more complicated, it's really hard, if not impossible, to predict. And so I think we will see these changes and psychological changes playing out over time. This isn't, done and dusted and now we move on. We're going to come back and forth on these things. People are going to go up and down those scales. And you know what, if we think about this entire event playing out over, let's say 10 years before things kind of get back to, normal, whatever the heck that might be, we are 2% of the way through 10 years on day 77. So we have a long way to go. Now that doesn't sound like the most optimistic view, but I think it's important to understand that there's a long road ahead, but a lot of things to happen and learn and opportunities to open up during that time. It looks pretty dark right now, but we do have a way to go. So I want to talk about the impact on business. For most small and medium business customers, and certainly the large businesses that I've talked to and worked for, and I should have said right at the beginning, a lot of this will look very, very simplistic. It's kind of just, that's how my brain works. Success was all about growth. Let's make things, let's make more money next year. Let's grow revenue. Let's grow profitability. We want to grow market share, whatever it is. And certainly since the GFC back in, what was that, 2007 or so, that has been the primary focus of most businesses. That's what leaders think about. That's what their financial people think about. That's what they invest in. And all of a sudden, in the space of 77 days again, I think success right now is about surviving. In fact, there's already a lot of businesses not surviving. I was reading a thing online yesterday that apparently Hertz in the States are looking at potentially going into bankruptcy, which would flood the market with 300,000 used cars. This is a big thing. There's massive companies suffering, and there are the smallest one-person businesses suffering as well. Right now, most business leaders in the small and medium business market are thinking about just how they survive, which makes complete sense based on those hierarchy things I showed you before. And I think where we're headed to tomorrow is success will be about resilience. Right now, I would imagine just about every business owner on the planet who's been investing for growth over the last 5 years would give back all of that growth to know that their business was going to be around in the next 5 years. Okay? And I think, again, going back to the mindset thing, the mindset around how to grow a business is very different around how to make a business resilient. And I think there's going to be a lot of interesting opportunity and change in that space because, as I said, those ripples flowing out, things are going to look a lot different in a month, they're going to look a lot different in a year, and they're going to look a lot different in 3 years. And we are going to bounce in and out. We will have companies that seem to have survived the first wave, fail in the second, customers of yours that look, okay, won't be, and vice versa. So that resilience piece, I think, is going to be absolutely critical, engineering for resilience. One of the other things I think we're going to see, and this is really obvious, but is the decline of the office. I saw a statistic the other day that 43% of 1,200 people that some organisation in the state surveyed have no desire to ever go back into an office. So let's call it a half because it's close enough. And what this has done is it's taken a lot of people kicking and screaming and shoved them into a work from home environment, and they've kind of gotten used to it, only in a very short space of weeks. I mean, literally a month and a bit, 6 weeks, 7 weeks. And I think that's interesting for a bunch of reasons. One is, if you think about the whole concept of an office, that's something that we dragged forward into 2020 from the Industrial Revolution. The whole idea of going to a place, to be at a place, to do a job is an extremely archaic and anachronistic concept for the vast majority of workers today. It's very different if you have to stand by a lathe. It's pretty hard to take that home. Airline pilots aren't allowed to take their planes home. It is kind of tricky for people, but actually for a lot of people, it's actually little hassle, and for many people, none at all. People are going to like this. They're going to get used to it. The other thing is it takes cars off the roads. Gee, maybe we can not invest in as many highways as we do. It might be really good for the environment if we take those cars off the road. There's a whole lot of flow-on effects from this that I think are substantial. One of them is if you have substantial investments in office space at the moment as a commercial landlord, I would be concerned. I can absolutely see a lot of individuals not wanting to go back to work, and a lot of business owners going, gee, I could take some money out of my P&L if I could strip some of my, my location of my building lease costs out. I think that will be very top of mind for a lot of people. I think that's going to be interesting. The effect on business that we've seen over the last X weeks is already, particularly in the States, wreaking absolute mayhem on middle management. And there's a few reasons for that. One of them is, with little doubt, some of the larger organizations are using this current situation as an opportunity to gut their organizations to save headcount, right? That makes sense. It's kind of strike while the iron's hot sort of thing. But the other thing is there's a lot of companies that have sent people home and are still ticking along okay. And the leaders of those companies are looking at their middle managers and going, well, those people we've sent home report into those people, and everything seems to be going all right. Maybe we don't need as many of those middle management people as we have currently. So I think we will see more of this. And I think this will eventually be the catalyst to quite a transformation in the enterprise space, larger organizations, and in some of the larger medium-sized business spaces. So if you're a middle manager, and I've been one of those, now's probably a good time, and this might sound flippant, but I'm not being flippant, to think about transferable skills what are the things that you know that you can move into your own businesses or into other businesses? Because I think we will see a number of organisations start to trim some people in that space. Schools, obviously, with the lockdown, have done things very differently. And again, if you think about it, it took them, a week or two, 3 weeks to figure out how to deliver stuff to students at home. It might not have been perfect. It could, technically it might have been better at times, but it's worked. And I think there's a couple of interesting things in that. One is this pandemic thing is going to last a while. Best case scenario, we'll have a vaccine in 18 months. Best case scenario, okay, which means we might likely see waves 2 and 3, or in the United States' case, 27, 28, and 29. And so there will be situations where we potentially have to go back into some form of lockdown again. We have a 16-year-old, my partner has her 16-year-old son at home. He's done a pretty good job of learning from home. He's back to school on Monday, and guess what? He has to catch a school bus to school, and guess what? They have to be socially distanced in the school bus, and guess what? When they do that, there aren't enough school buses in all of Tauranga to transport the kids. So some of the impacts of even going back to school during a pandemic are quite substantial. I can absolutely see a future where the Ministry of Education really starts to rethink should they be building more and more schools. And again, if you think about it, the model of dropping 30 children in a room in front of a teacher for a day as an educational model is 200 or 300 years old. Probably not a bad time for us to rethink it. The other thing here too is that the students, I think a lot of students, particularly year 10, 11, 12, 13 students, enjoy this and are capable of doing this and managing. You will have parents who, going back to my previous slide about the office, who are working from home and are able to provide some sort of supervision for those people, so for those kids. So I can see those two things kind of coming together. I think we'll see a fundamental shift in the way schooling happens. I think there's a lot of organisations that are starting to really think now, and it's about time, about digital first. And I'm not talking about websites and apps and other things. I'm talking about how they go and sell products and services that are delivered digitally. I have, over the last 6 or 7 weeks, been inundated via Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, everything, with online courses for all sorts of bits and pieces, where people that are in the consulting and advisory game are figuring out how to, write an ebook, deliver a video, a bunch of videos about things, run webinars, and all the other stuff. I think a lot of organisations need to be thinking about doing things digitally first. Why? Because if we do go into lockdowns 2 and 3 in New Zealand, or 27, 28, and 29 in the States, we're just going to run back into the same issues again. Now, that's going to be difficult for some organisations. It's pretty hard to deliver a loaf of bread digitally, but haven't we all become good bakers? But I think there is a real opportunity here for people to rethink their businesses. And lastly, in this part, I think we're going to see a lot more as a result of the above, a lot more innovation and diversification, and that's a very good thing indeed. New Zealand, I think we talk about the boat batch BMW phenomenon and laugh at it, but it's kind of true. Certainly, I've spent a lot of time in the States, and the desire for growth, push for growth there is full on. A lot of New Zealand businesses, kind of like the idea of plateauing and having a relatively good lifestyle. They can afford what they can afford. They like how they live. They like where they live. We are in paradise, and it's a very safe paradise right now. And for that reason, maybe you've tended to back away from that innovation and diversification stuff, and all of a sudden, bam, now they've got to be thinking about it. So I think these are topics that are going to be top of mind for a lot of people, starting right about 6 weeks ago, hopefully. So let's talk about third part of the agenda, which is some of the actions or suggestions or challenges maybe that I reflect back to you all. So the first thing is get strategic. I've been advising, working in, having coffees and beers with small business people, small businesses for a long time now, probably the better part of 15 to 20 years. And again, as I said, I will talk in some pretty broad brush strokes. My opinion is that operationally they're often very good, and strategically they're often not. And I think, given where we are and given that road that we might face for the next 10 years or so, I think it's absolutely critical that business leaders are able to think strategically, and that's difficult because actually a lot of business leaders I've worked with and talked to in the past spend a very large chunk of their life firefighting, you know, putting out all those fires and sorting out all that stuff, or they're dragged into operational stuff. And so they don't even have the headspace or the bandwidth, the time to think strategically, let alone the skills potentially. You know, strategic thinking is a muscle, and if you haven't done it for a while, it's kind of hard to kind of get back into that groove. I think every business leader right now really needs to think about how much of their day is spent being and thinking strategically, and if they don't have space in their day, they need to figure out how to make it. The other thing I think businesses need to think about is getting nimble. And this has been a hot button of mine for a very, very long time. I think far too many businesses run themselves almost as if they're running a marathon. They've got a plan, it's a 1-year plan, and they're going to execute against that plan. I've talked to businesses that have 5-year plans. I once talked to a business that had a 30-year plan. For most small and medium businesses, and again, there will be exceptions to this, I think the days of creating these massive plans that are obsolete the day that someone hits print or save are rapidly going to disappear. And I think we need to move into a world where businesses learn to be nimble. And the analogy that I use for that is, imagine you're driving down the road in your car on a foggy evening. You can only see as far as your headlights go. I think that's what we have to get used to as business people. You need to be able to navigate to where your headlights are, and then, you know, as more road becomes visible, you change direction. Or another analogy might be orienteering. So, you know, you sprint for a couple of kilometers, you stop, you get your map and compass out, reorient yourself, work out the best pathway, and you sprint again. Now, as a business, you might do that, you know, instead of having a once-a-year planning session or maybe some sort of mid-year where the hell are we at session, you might have quarterly, you know, orienteering sessions. You might even have monthly orienteering sessions, you know, and in those sessions, you might want to think about what's happening in the outside world, what's happening in our business, what are our competitors doing, what are the macro level things we need to think about, what are some risks that have emerged in the, you know, last period that we didn't see in the one prior, what are some opportunities that have emerged. It's a very, very different way of thinking and working. And again, I think a lot of businesses have gotten used to this kind of slow burn model. You know, here's my plan and I'm executing against it. And I would argue that I think you might need to file those away safely in a drawer and actually think about how you become more of an orienteer runner. And you need to learn to self-disrupt. I looked a few years ago at starting a company that we were going to call Baskets Incorporated. And what we were going to do was come in and work with boards to tell them how we would destroy their company. Because if you know how to destroy a company, you know how to protect a company. And it amazes me how few organizations don't self-disrupt. And we've seen so much disruption already in business over the last, let's say, decade, certainly the last 5 years, where companies that thought they were absolutely safe, you know, were just sitting ducks in the water and someone would come from left field and absolutely, you know, chew up their market space and spit them out again. And, you know, we looked at all that from afar, and that tended to happen to really big businesses, and I'll look at them being disrupted. It's going to happen to smaller businesses. Your competitor that works 2 buildings down the road is going to be thinking about how they disrupt you. Self-disrupt yourself. You need to do it to yourself. Better to do it to yourself now than have it done to you, right? And lastly, I want to talk about securing customer loyalty, right? That's the most critical thing to be doing right now. You know, customers, we go right back to what I talked at the beginning, are the lifeblood. They are where the cash comes from in your business. You need to be loving your customers to death right now. And there's 2 reasons. One is, why wouldn't you, right? But the second one is the proverbial pivot. And pivoting is all about keeping a foot in one place and moving the other foot, hopefully only got 2, to somewhere slightly different, right? You can't pivot, you know, where you keep your one foot is your customers, and then you pivot, okay? And think about it this way. Right now, customers are in the situation of selling existing things to companies are in the position of selling existing products and services to existing customers, right? To pivot, I would argue that what you need to think about is starting to sell new things to existing customers. So to do that, you need to secure your customer base. You must do everything you can to de-risk your customer base. Because, as I said, that's where your cash is going to be coming from. To do that, you must understand your customers. And I have in my time been really surprised at the number of companies that do not They know their customers, they know their names, they know who they are and everything, but they don't truly understand their customers and why they choose to buy, that company's products and services. And I would now like just momentarily to clamber up on a soapbox. Here's my first piece of advice. Don't rely on Net Promoter Score. Net Promoter Score, I'm sure everyone's heard of it. It's the thing of basically subtracting the number of detractors from the number of promoters, and you magically come up with a thing called NPS, and that's how satisfied your customers are, right? So, hey, I've got satisfied customers, all good, we can move on and disrupt ourselves and go and do something else. I, increasingly over time, and certainly over the last couple of years, have come to look quite askance at NPS as a tool, as a mechanism, for two key reasons. One is they think that customers might be passive, and I've never heard a more bullshit thing in my life. There is no such thing as a passive customer. If a customer is passive and your competitor comes along and offers them something better, they will move. Okay, passive doesn't exist. And the second point is NPS has been lovingly crafted from a graphical perspective to look kind of linear, and it's not. It's really important to understand that it's not, as simple as moving people up the food chain. And I'll explain the reason for that. This graph, value versus loyalty, is something that was created by a guy named Ray Kortoplesky, who was at AT&T many years ago. And what it shows is that the value versus loyalty curve is not linear. And in fact, to move, if we think about value as being customer loyalty, those two things are kind of interchangeable. If you're delivering huge value, they will be loyal. That's how customers work. To move from a 6 to if we think about the willingness, to recommend, the value you need to deliver has to increase substantially to move from 6 to 8, or 6 to 9. It doesn't look the same way on an NPS scale. And so I think this value versus loyalty curve is a really important thing to bear in mind. So customer loyalty, as I said, is about delivering true value, right? And so that means you need to understand what value is. And again, most businesses I talk to, and I start talking about value, what's the value you deliver? It's a really interesting conversation, because actually a lot of people can't articulate that. Value, in Ray Kortoplesky's view, is about quality over price. What's delivered in return for the price I got? Now, the quality of what's delivered, the thing that's delivered, isn't just the thing. It obviously is the thing, but it's more than just the thing. There's other dimensions to that as well. There's things like the brand image. Is this a company I want to be dealing with? I feel good about dealing with. What are the options they provide? What's the warranty look like? What was the process of getting the darn thing before it even turned up? The contract, the negotiation, the delivery, the maintenance, the billing, the packaging, all of those other bits and pieces are part of the value that you're delivering. And then you need to think about the price. What does it cost the customer? And it's not just what they drop into your bank account in return for the item or service received. It's that basic price. It's what it costs to get it up and running. It's how long did it take? What was the, how long did we have to have all of our people involved in negotiating, getting contracts to lawyers to, cut a deal with these people? How much return on effort is kind of a way I think about it. Now, I guess if there's one slide in this entire deck, let's say two, that I'd love you to maybe think a bit more about, it's this one and the one prior. Because I, as I said before, I have seen so many businesses over the years that do not understand that NPS is, that it is not a magical matter of how loyal their customers are. I mean, I guess another way of thinking about it is, if the only thing you're relying on is NPS, are there other parts of your business that you've only got one metric that you measure things with? The chances are that the answer is no. And then when we get to this whole value thing, it's a very rare day I can sit down with a customer and have this conversation and have them be able to reflect or articulate back to me, how they see this, how they understand it. Now, the other thing is that this will vary by people within your the customer organization. And I'll give you one last example, maybe just before I finish. While I was at Datacom, we sat down and did a bunch of this value tree stuff with a whole bunch of Datacom's customers, and it was absolutely enlightening because it turned out each customer saw the world in a different way. And in fact, one very large customer that Datacom deals with, we sat down with them And Datacom's approach to them was about being, you know, the best possible price, and not being cheap, but really good people, good services for the right price. When we went and interviewed them, we literally sat down with their C-suite and talked to them. It turned out that was about number 3, 4, or 5 on their value tree. Obviously, price was important, but actually what they had were massive plans for growth, and technology was a huge underpinning component of that. And what they absolutely wanted to have and know and be secure in, from their technology provider, was that technology provider could help them grow. That was the number one value thing. It dwarfed everything else. And here were we getting in and, you know, sharpening pencils and cutting rates and all sorts of other things. That wasn't the conversation. We needed to make sure that our responses to their RFPs, etc., were all about how we were going to help them grow. It was an absolute eye-opening experience. So just to sum things up, these are the things I'd love you to go away and do. Please get strategic. I don't think there's been any better time in the history of business to get strategic. Get nimble. If you're running marathons now, please think about becoming an orienteer. Get a compass, get a map. Self-disrupt yourself, because if you don't do it, you know, keep the cannibals in the family was the best description I ever heard a few years ago. If you don't do it to yourself, someone's going to do it to you. And secure customer loyalty, above all else, secure customer loyalty. If you can't do that, then you have a serious problem, because we've got a long way to go here. And the best asset that your business could have right now are customers that are with you through thick and thin. Thank you.